Welcome to the December edition of the Farmer Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmer Supply Association. We're taping on December 14th. Of course, I think harvest is pretty much wrapped up. I mean, there might be a scattered soybean here and there. I haven't seen any lately, so maybe we're all done. So it's time to maybe talk about, review the past year. I always try to do one of those review programs every year in December, and that's what I want to do today. Just do a quick review of 2021 before we move into 2022. Really, probably three main topics I want to hit on as I review 2021. Number one, it was a year with pretty good yields for about all of our crops. Rice certainly good. Soybeans, you can find some mixtures with the soybeans, some average to below average mixed in with those good yields. But overall, pretty good year for soybeans too. Certainly corn as well. So I think we can classify this year as one with good yields for pretty much most of all of our crops. Second thing I want to hit on, it was a hot topic for our rice farmers at end after harvest was not so good rice milling yields. I did a program on that, I think back in probably September, maybe my September report about how the milling yields were not what we want them to be, and certainly they never got a lot better after that. And finally, just a quick finish up, as we look forward to 2022, and I hit on this with fertilizer last month, just those increasing input costs, and that's certainly, if you talk to any farmer right now, if you run up across anybody, they're pretty much going to talk about input costs, especially fertilizer costs. So, I want to just kind of briefly touch on that before we close for the year. First thing is why the good yields, and again, it wasn't a totally across the board deal, but there were pretty good yields, in most cases this year. Why the good yields? And normally, every time we have, the thing I'm looking at as I go into harvest season every year when people are asking me about yields, I really, besides looking at the crop, obviously, the two things I think of is what were our planting dates? Did we get planted timely? Did we get planted on the early side, with our crops? And that usually gives you a pretty good sign you're going to have a good year. And the other thing is weather. And of course, weather's a huge factor in farming, across the board. So, it's one of the things you want to look at, just even looking at the crop, but what kind of weather did we have as far as, grain fill and those kinds of things. Usually look at about three things. Temperatures, we like moderate temperatures, not heat every day, especially those high nighttime temperatures seem to hurt us, yield-wise in everything. So we want to have good temperatures, again, moderate temperatures. Rainfall, the rainfall deal can go both ways. Of course, it can help us obviously with moisture, especially where we don't have good irrigation, control with our crops. Where we've got, can make, we can have easy and good and timely irrigation. And a lot of times we may not want a lot of rainfall. We just want to keep on our irrigation schedule and go with that. But certainly rainfall can have a big effect, especially on those fields that we can irrigate very well. And the third thing I look at is sunshine. If we had a lot of clear skies, sunny days, to have the photosynthesis to fill out those grains and like that. So that's another thing I look at. So temperatures, rainfall, and also sunshine. And if you look at all those things, you don't necessarily see great yields coming. I mean, they may be okay, but looking at those three things before harvest, you would say, well, we may have decent yields, but we're not going to have as good yields as we ended up having for the most part. We did have, a couple of good spells related to that. In early August, we had a front go through, and it gave us some sunny skies, some very moderate temperatures. We had highs in the 80s, lows in the 60s, which is about where you want to be to have good grain fill and those kind of things. So we did have that. And also we didn't have a lot of rainy days, so we had a lot of sunshine, which is also very important. We didn't have the rain that we may need on some of these fields that don't have good irrigation or non-irrigated. But again, not a lot of rain days, so we had pretty good sunshine, so that probably helped us as well. But these things weren't, just across the board every day. Didn't have we had some hot spells in there, with some cloudy days and rainy days in there to kind of break those good spells away. So, again, going into the season, into the harvest, I thought we were pretty good, but maybe not quite as good as we ended up being, especially with the rice. Also, planting dates are very important again. If you get those early planting dates and timely planting dates, that'll help you too. So that's kind of the things I look for good yields. And again, we had some of that, but maybe not as much as you would think for the good yields we had. With planting dates, they were kind of sporadic as well. We didn't get anything planted real early this year, and we got pretty late on some things as well, especially with some rice and soybeans both. So again, these factors that normally point to really good yields were not totally there. They were there to an extent. So again, I was kind of surprised at some of the yields we ended up with. So what else do we look at? The other production practices. I think we're just getting better at some things. We've had the research and the experience in the field to kind of give us some pointers on maybe some things we can do to help ourselves. So I think some of those production factors were to go along with the weather kind of were played a part in his good yields as well. Some of the things as far as production practices, our crop varieties, our hybrids, I think they just continually get better, especially in rice and corn. I think soybeans are a little bit different. We've transitioned to some of those herbicide traits, and especially the Enlist technology. We love the weed control with the Enlist technology. Maybe certainly the varieties aren't quite there where we want to be. I mean, they'll get there with crop breeding, but with the Enlist varieties, the 2,4-D tolerance, the varieties with the great yield potential still aren't there, but we're getting that great weed control, which helps us out there. So, that's some of the things that play a factor there. Planting dates, again, we've talked about that. We now know that getting on the early side of those planting dates, not being late is very important. We especially adopted this in soybeans. When the weather allows us, we're trying to get those soybeans planted in April to a large extent, and that's going to set us up for good yields as well. We used to not worry about planting soybeans. Didn't even think about planting soybeans in April. You'd get your rice going, all of it planted, and then worry about beans after that. So, we've learned that, and I think that's helped us with beans. There's a lot of good seed treatments out there, fungicide, insecticide, growth regulator type seed treatments that we're using now on our seed, and that's helping us quite a bit. Fertility, we now know that how important potash is. Some things like boron, sulfur, zinc, some of those things we're using wisely in our fertility program. We've kind of fine-tuned our nitrogen rates, know where we can put a little more nitrogen and help us. So I think we've learned a lot about fertility, and I think we're adopting more of that. That's helping us. Weed control, and you've heard me talk many times over the crop season about using residuals and overlapping residual herbicides, and I think we've adopted that, and that has really helped us have cleaner crops over the last year or two than we've had in the past. So I think that's a big factor in our yields as well. And also on the weed control, just timeliness of those post-emergence applications. The herbicide technologies in soybeans have really helped us with the XtendFlex and also the Enlist beans. We're just cleaner because of that, along with the overlapping of the residual herbicides. Fungicides, we're using those where they need to be used, and some people use them pretty general, across the board, but we know those places where we need to use them, especially like in rice, or maybe might not be putting those combination more expensive fungicides out there. At least getting some propiconazole or tilt out there to help with diseases like narrow brown leaf spot, cercospora, those things that can maybe surprise us when we think we've done a good job with diseases, but maybe we haven't. We get surprised at the end with something like a narrow brown leaf spot. Well, the use of the tilt fungicides helping us there, and also just irrigation management. I think the computer hole selection, the irrigation scheduling, we've gotten better with that. So all those factors combined with the weather play a factor in these good yields. One hit quick on the milling. We talked about the below par milling that we had our rice this year. Several factors with that, and usually it comes down to wetting and drying. Once that kernel gets mature, we don't want that kernel wetting and drying. That causes cracks, causes it to crack, and during the milling process, and that obviously hurts our milling yield. So one of the things we had this year was delayed maturity. We got late in the season, and the rice just never would really get totally dried down. It took a long time to get that, And that just gives you more time for bad things to happen. You know, it may be rice stink bugs feeding, that can affect milling, various fungi, opportunistic fungi getting in the kernel and affecting the quality of it as well. And again, just the wetting and drying. When it takes longer for it to mature, you've got some dry kernels on that panicle, you've got some green kernels on that panicle. You know, those dry ones are wetting and drying and have the potential for cracking during milling. Those green ones, they kind of grind up during milling, so all that affects your milling yield in a negative way. So a lot of that went on this year. Most of it we have very little, if any, control over. It's just things that happen because of weather and various maturity factors as well. So that's the milling story, and hopefully we'll be better on that next year. Finally, finishing up with input costs. And like I said, fertilizer is the main thing we've seen. A lot of the other materials, we have no idea what the costs are going to be next spring. And usually it's a little later earlier in the season next year as we approach planting is when we'll find out a lot of those costs. And would expect for about everything to be higher, and we're going to have to deal with that. We'll have to manage that. We need to make probably if you're going to make cuts, I think they need to be selective, like we talked about last time. Don't cut those things that are really going to hurt you if you cut them. So, after the first of the year in our early 2022 programs, we'll talk about that. Maybe some places where we don't want to cut, maybe some places you can cut and not feel it too bad. So that's it for 2021. I'd like to wish everyone out there, especially our Farmer Supply customers, a Merry Christmas and a good New Year, and we'll be here to work with you in 2022. This has been Randy Kopechka with your Farmer Supply Association Agri Report for December.